And I say exactly the same thing to whether you're conservative or liberal, whether you like him, whether you hate him. And I can tell you one thing, whenever I'm done with a talk, and people will come up and say, oh, I love what you said.
And I think with handwriting analysis, in different people's hands, you can see the strengths and the blind spots.
Every little thing means something about a person when you look at their handwriting. And when you see big phallic symbols, you can't just say, oh, not pretend not to see them. That is going to affect their life and their personality.
Is Donald Trump a narcissist based on his signature and other samples you've seen?
This week, we're excited to share a brand new YouTube show and podcast we think you'll enjoy. Handwriting experts Michelle Dresbold and Jamie Mason Cohen brings a thrilling new lens to forensic personality profiling, deception detection, and understanding the minds of the world's most influential people. In each episode, Michelle Dresbold and Jamie Mason Cohen, renowned handwriting analysts, apply their unique skills to reveal the inner thoughts, motivations, and secrets hidden in the handwriting of celebrities, criminals, politicians, and other public figures. Using forensic handwriting analysis, they offer viewers an unprecedented look into the psyche of those in the headlines. Join us every week for Michelle and Jamie Reading People as we dive into the fascinating world of forensic handwriting analysis. Tune in on any podcast platforms for a blend of entertainment, psychology, and forensic insight that uncovers the hidden layers of today's most intriguing personalities.
Michelle, the presidential election is coming up in less than 10 days. I would love to jump in and take a look at the handwriting of the two main players in this saga, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Now, even though I'm Canadian and you're American, can we look at their signatures to see what we see in their personalities that lies beneath the surface?
I think it's a great idea. Let's go for it.
Okay, amazing. So let's start with Donald Trump.
Okay. I'll tell you the very first thing I see, it's probably what everybody sees, it's those angles. Do you see all those angles, chop, chop, chop?
Yes.
And I tell people, if you want to understand a person, get into their mind, imitate their handwriting. So, Jamie, would you do me a favor and just make a bunch of angles with your hand?
Yes. It's like a runaway train. It's like
right. Just go chop, 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 chop. In fact, anybody out there, chop, 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 chop. Try to imitate that handwriting. Let me ask you a question. How do you feel?
I feel anxious. My heart's pounding. I feel aggressive.
Right. You feel aggressive.
Yes.
And so what angles mean when you see that in handwriting, it means you feel aggressive or hostile or ready to fight. So if you want to know a person, all you have to do is imitate their handwriting and you will get inside their head. So chop, 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 chop. Those are angles. Do me a favor. Can you do me a favor, Jamie?
Yes.
Would you make circles with your hand? Just nice circles.
Yes. Flowing shapes. Yes.
Nice circles. How do you feel?
I feel like the waves in the ocean.
So when you compare how someone with angles feels compared to someone all curvy,
yes,
you can tell the difference. So curves are softness, relaxation, gentleness, and angles are tough, competitive, ready to get out there and fight. And have you ever seen a girl whose handwriting is in a second grade, let's say 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade?
Yeah, it's very bubbly, very in the middle zone, rounded.
Gentle. I mean, until they get a little older. But yeah, so that's the first thing. What do you see in his handwriting?
Well, I would agree. Those angles, I see someone, when you see that level of sharpness, rigidity in their viewpoints, this is someone who might love to debate. They seem to be energized to gain power, and they're constantly going back and forth like a boxer. They would want to take a punch and want to give a punch. And so they actually welcome that level of give and take.
Oh, definitely. And when you have angles, like ideally, a person should have angles and they should have some curves. Because what do you want? You need to be aggressive. You need to get ahead. Sometimes you need to fight, but you need those curves to be gentle and soft and loving. So, a really, if it's too gentle, too rounded, you have somebody you can kick over. Too angular, that person might kick you over. So that's your ideal.
Now, Michelle, I heard Jordan Peterson, who was
Okay.
talking about Donald Trump today from his clinical psychological background. He said, this is a person who's highly assertive, who is borderline narcissistic.
Right.
And yet he said he's someone with compassion, which is something I hadn't heard associated as a trait with Donald Trump. How do you
Okay.
respond to that?
I would actually really love to see a brand new handwriting sample of his, because I think when he wrote in 2016, he was tough as nails. He may have gotten a little more rounded in his handwriting. So it would be interesting to see, because his handwriting went from angular to extreme angular, and I think it may have gotten a little softer. So there's a little bit of roundness in his handwriting. I would say if you were going to fight him, you don't expect compassion. If you're going to fight him, you won't expect compassion.
Yeah, on
Maybe.
that point, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
What I also found fascinating
Mm-hmm.
is an interview that he gave with Joe Rogan. He was humble at times when he was speaking
Okay.
to Joe Rogan, and
Mm-hmm.
it was a soft interview where Joe Rogan was a little bit skeptical, but he didn't
Okay.
touch upon his many discretions and difficulties that he's had. Yet, Donald Trump came across as charming,
Yes.
warm at times, and left the interview telling Joe Rogan how much he appreciated him, what an honor it was. And I'm thinking, if I only heard pieces of this out of context, he's quite a charming fellow.
Yes. Yes. Now, I'll tell you something interesting. I've done a ton of talks about Donald Trump from the time he was a businessman till presidency and on. And I say exactly the same thing to whether you're conservative or liberal, whether you like him, whether you hate him. And I can tell you one thing: whenever I'm done with a talk, the people will come up and say, "Oh, I love what you said about Donald Trump." And I'm like, "Oh." And it's surprising that both groups say they love him. And I love what I say, not that they love him. One hates him, one loves him, but they both love the analysis. And I don't change a word between liberal or conservative groups. And conservatives will go, "Oh yeah, that fighter. I love him that he fights and he'll stand up for you." And you talk to a more liberal group and they'll go, "Oh, he's a fighter. He just wants to fight about everything." And so it is interesting how you interpret him. I have a feeling that his handwriting has actually gotten softer, and I would love to see it. Do you know that he is a handwriting analyst himself?
Well, I did hear that. He's good at reading people. He has these initial impressions. Often they're mean, yet
Mm-hmm.
he fixates on a trait. And even
Right.
someone on Shark Tank, Barbara Corcoran, said
Okay.
that Donald Trump was the most effective negotiator that she's
Mm-hmm.
ever come across, in the way that he could hit right on someone's weakness and have
Okay.
the ability to cut right to the chase in understanding it. And I think with handwriting analysis in different people's hands, you can see the strengths and the blind spots.
I think it's a wonderful tool. I mean, Donald Trump said he was quoted as saying, "I'm somewhat of a handwriting expert." So I bet he studies people, both body language, both just picking it up. And I bet when wants to, he will examine someone's handwriting.
Some people will talk about Donald Trump as someone whose mental faculties are slowing down. And in fairness, we're talking about a signature from several years ago. Yet when I look at this signature, without bias, when I'm just looking at the signature, the level of those upward strokes, the analytical, the investigative, the curiosity on the upward zone, and also that wedge at the bottom, that V shape. That looks to me as someone who is very sharp and fast when they're in some type of a debate, some type of dialogue. They're fast thinking. How would
Yeah.
you analyze his mental faculties on several levels?
Okay, as you said, it would be very interesting to see his handwriting now. And I have a feeling it has changed a little bit because he seems to have changed. So when you change, your handwriting changes. Those angles do show sharpness and picking up things very, very quickly. Now that's his signature. We'd have to. I have seen his writing in general, but his signature on a surface basis, he's going to pick something up very, very quickly and be able to respond. Those are those high angles and those dips that look V-shaped. That means you dig into something. So very, very quickly, he would be able to look at you and look at me and go, she's thinking this, he's thinking that. He picks those things up. That is a gift that he does have.
Yes, and on the flip side of that, it's a gift in some ways. Obviously, it's helped him get to where he is in life on multiple levels. Is
Yes.
Donald Trump a narcissist based on his signature and other samples you've seen?
The answer is probably yes. And in fact, I mean, to what degree somebody is a narcissist? I mean, you don't go for that power unless you are somewhat of a narcissist. And do you know that they've done studies of CEOs of almost all these big companies, and almost every single one of them is a narcissist? I mean, you do I'm sure he's willing to step on somebody to get ahead, good, bad, or otherwise. So, yes, I would say that all those angles do not show somebody who's really, really like, oh, let me give my heart to you. That's just not who they are. It's just not who he is.
Trump has some unusual shapes in his signature.
Yes,
Some
he
might describe
does.
them as phallic symbols. What do you have to say
Yes.
about that?
Well, I wrote an article for Politico magazine in 2000, I think it was 16. And he has a phallic symbol. If you don't know what a phallic symbol is out there, well, look at somebody's male part. But anyhow, it actually looks like a big man's part. Let's just say it that. And when you have that, it's like, hey, look at me, I'm a big hunk of a man. And I remember giving a talk 2016, and I said, what could get him in trouble is not the best habits with women. Sexually, he's a little bit too overt. I'm trying to be nice. And someone in the audience like, oh, leave me alone. I'm like, why do you talk about somebody's sexual habits? I said, you'd be surprised what got Bill Clinton in trouble, his sexual habits. What really got Donald Trump? I mean, he could go over everything. What got him in trouble? His sexual habits. So every little thing means something about a person when you look at their handwriting. And when you see big phallic symbols, you can't just say, oh, not pretend not to see them. That is going to affect their life and their personality.
What have we missed, even though this is a brief analysis, in his handwriting that we want to bring to attention?
Well, I'll tell you something about, and it's not his handwriting, it's his wife's, Melania. When I first saw Melania's handwriting, I thought it was a joke because it looks like Donald Trump's handwriting, all those angles, but it's a little curvier. And I'm like, oh, someone's making a joke of Donald Trump's handwriting, saying it's Melania, just this, angular, but put a little curve in it. And it was hers, and it is hers. And I always wondered, do they get along? Do they think alike? When you have handwriting that looks like somebody else's, the two of you actually think a lot alike. So as tough as you think Donald Trump is, Melania may be a little tougher.
Isn't that interesting? And
Yeah.
if you do write like your partner, if you're in a relationship, then there's a certain commonality in your thinking patterns, in the way that you see in the way you see the world and the way you process things.
Right, that is true. I mean, people ask me that, like, oh, am I compatible with this person? And sometimes I go, you're compatible because you're so much alike. But then other times it's like, well, you're very, very different. So you have to understand the other person's differences. And if those differences complement your weaknesses and your strengths, then you're a good couple. But the more your handwriting looks like that person, the more, just without explaining things, the more you're going to understand that person.
How might he behave if he loses the election? Is there anything we can decipher or decode within the handwriting that shows any difference than the way he responded last time?
Like I said, we're going to have to write him a letter and have him give us some new handwriting to see if he's different. His old handwriting, which, we've been looking at for years, if he lost, he was not going to take it easily. When you have all those angles in the middle, there's a big X in his handwriting too. That means don't cross me.
Yes.
So I would love to see if that X has disappeared from his handwriting, but I have a feeling he would much prefer to win. He is not a good loser.
He's not a good loser. And
No.
that was a really good transition as we talk about Kamala Harris, who people know less about because she's only really become a truly national figure in the public eye in recent times since she took over from Joe Biden, because as a vice president, we didn't hear from her that much. She was more in the background, and now she's come forward. So it will be interesting for us to take a look at her signature to see what we can learn from her as we move toward this consequential election.
If you look at that K, it could be an A. You wouldn't even know it's a K. You can read almost everything else in her name, but you can't read that first letter.
Okay.
I mean, it's called an ambiguous letter.
Yes.
When you see something, I think this is one of the things, like if I were coaching her, when you have ambiguous letters, you sort of talk around things. You don't just get to the point, this is the way it is. So you're not sure how to interpret her. And that's why that K, you can't read it really. So when you're hearing her talk, you're not quite sure always what you're hearing. So it's not as clear as what most people, like she can be clear because the rest of her name, except for her last name, is actually very readable. But that K is not. And that K means, well, I'm going to say something, but I'm not sure what I'm saying. And it's kind of it has a little loops and it goes like a river, different areas. So I think, like if she had called me to advise her from her handwriting, I'd say something, say it very clearly, say it very distinctly, and don't talk in a lot of different ways that people are having a hard time interpreting what you said. Does that make sense to you?
It makes sense to me. And to that point, when you said, what does the K look like, and started describing the ambiguity, my eye actually went to her last name, because the lack of clarity in the H and her last name, which is just that scribble, that might mean, from my perspective, what you said. And it's really amplifying that, which is, are you showing me all of yourself, or are you keeping a part of who you really are away? It's being seen, but not truly known, because the actual signature is, I would say, it's confident in terms of its size on several levels and even its pressure, but the lack of clarity, like you mentioned in the first letter, I was focused more on the last letter, saying, I'm not sure if she's really showing us who she truly is.
Or maybe, here's another interpretation of it. You know how we're not saying Donald, we say Trump. You don't say Harris, you say Kamala. And so when she writes her last name, you can't read it at all. It's almost done. So you see her first name, and almost her last name is almost an afterthought, almost as if she wants to move away from her last name, whatever that meant or means to her.
Yes.
And so it's not a coincidence that everybody just knows her by her first name, and that's what she puts out, her first name.
Yeah, that's intriguing. She tends to skip over it or not wanting to dive deeper into certain things. There's some fluency in that K, even though it's backwards. So she's fluent on some level, but there's a lack of depth in the response.
Maybe. I mean, with everybody, it would be great if we could see more than just their signature.
Yes.
But that I also think that last name sort of looks like a smile, kind of like two eyes, the dot or something. it's a very interesting signature. I've actually just seen it very recently. And I sometimes think that first letter in her name, is it a musical symbol? Is it like look like a butterfly? It's actually funny thing about her signature is it's actually very feminine. You wouldn't think a man probably wouldn't write. It's a very feminine signature. And maybe that's our, we don't bring it up, but I mean, Trump's signature really has no feminine qualities at all. At all. Maybe he needs some of Kamala's that, and maybe she needs a little bit of him. He's a tough nut, and she might be have a little more good, bad, or otherwise feminine features, and maybe we need a little combination of those two.
Yeah, the middle zone, those strokes underneath have a certain curvature, but where Donald Trump is quite rigid in his views, at least what we saw with the 2016 signature, which we're referring to mostly, her handwriting is that's more adaptable, isn't it? Do you agree with that or not?
I do agree with that. I think he's like I said, we need a combination of these two, or maybe something in the middle. Where it's rigid. When you have all those angles, that's rigid. Hey, take it or leave it or get out of my sight. And hers is like, well, let me think about it. I hear you. Maybe I'll think about it. And yeah. It's those, like you say, yin and yang. Ideally, we want a little bit of both.
What I see in that first name is I see strokes that are slightly to the right consistently on the A, on the M, on the second A, on the L, in her first name. Can't really tell as much on the last name. That tends to be, when we see that consistent stroke, empathy, or the ability to walk in others' shoes, the ability to consistently want to understand someone on a heart level, not just analytical sizing them up. Do you see empathy, Michelle, in the handwriting of Kamala?
Yes. When you have a rightward slanted handwriting, that does show empathy or reaching out to others. Yes. So I would agree. I mean, they're so different actually in the way they approach life. They're actually pretty much opposites. It's surprising because often you have two people, they may have different views, but they're basically the same personality with different views. These are two very, very different people. Maybe they could work together. I don't think so, but they think maybe what she lacks is what he has, and what he lacks is maybe what she has. Maybe there's a little combination, like I said before. He has that toughness, and in this world you may need that toughness, and she might have that, like, let me hold your hand, here for you. So who knows? And they're just they're opposites. They're actually opposite people. There's only one thing in common with both of them, and that one thing is that you really can't read either one of them. You think you do. You can't read his signature at all. You wouldn't know if it said Donald Trump or whatever. You have no idea. And actually hers, as I told you, you think you can read hers, but you really can't. So both of them have a disguise that they put up, and you really can't read. Like anybody who thinks, oh, I understand Donald, oh, I understand Kamala, they don't. They are both working under sort of a mask, or whatever you want to call it.
And on that note, we really don't know what's going to happen, like millions of other people who are on the edge of their seats.
They'll use us as their consultants. They both would be doing, but it wouldn't be such a close race if one of them had called us. How's that?
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have those high initial letters, high zones, which means they crave recognition. But when you look at her last name, it means that last name, you can't read it at all.
Yeah.
And that's something different than when you think you can read something, but you can't. So her last name, not being able to read it, actually means that her last name, if you probably check back whatever Harris meant to her isn't that important, and she wanted to make it on her own, not whatever that Harris last name meant. But that first K is actually more important than the last name, because it's the thing of thinking you can read somebody, thinking you can read that K, but you really can't. And that's more important than a signature that you can't read. A lot of people make a line, you can't read it. They just don't want you to read them. When someone makes something on purpose that you can't read, that's very significant.
And that could be a form of attempting subconsciously to control the way that she's perceived by others.
Yes. Oh, it could be that. And when you have a letter that's ambiguous, and Donald Trump does this too, it means that you're always giving yourself an out in case you've been misinterpreted. Oh, you thought I said that? I didn't say that. I said this. Oh, I thought I saw this. And so it's always, the person always has a little out. And they always say, well, no, I didn't really say that. So in your head, you might be thinking, oh, I think I understand her. Someone else, no, I think I understand this. And that's on purpose. Those are those ambiguous numbers, ambiguous letters. Always watch out for those things. At least I do.
Yeah,
And I'm not saying who I like or don't like. That's was surprising to me.
Yeah, it's hard to get to know the person. It's hard to get to know their motives, their intentions. There's a lack of clarity in some ways of who they are. That signature is what someone publicly shows. The writing is what's underneath.
Right. A signature is really how you want the other people to see you. You never sign your signature for you. I never go, I, Michelle Dresbold, have to go to the store and buy a potato. I only write my name for you. I sign something for you. This is how I want you as the public to see me.
Yes. And that is a word that might describe her in her public-facing persona.
Right. And we've got to get more of their handwriting. That will be the next show. You'll get to really know what's beyond that surface that they're not showing us.
And that will be part 2. So between now and then, if we can find both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris' recent handwriting.
Right. Let's see if that handwriting has changed.